I'm really happy to welcome Professor Yigal Bronner, who is professor in the Department of Asian Studies at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. He teaches and writes about Sanskrit poetry and poetic theory and South Asian intellectual history. And he has done, for example, extensive work on the polymath Appaya Dikshita, who was one of India's leading intellectuals in the 16th century. He has also worked on Dandin's Kavya Dasha, which is one of the most influential treatises ever produced in Asia, leading a team effort that focused on the text's Asia-wide impact. And this resulted in the edited volume A Lasting Vision, Dandin's Mirror in the World of Asian Letters, which was published last year by Oxford University Press. Another project of Professor Bronner is towards a history of Sanskrit poetics and mapping the world through Korea poetry that is pertaining to Dutta Kavya or Sandesha Kavya. And of course, the project and database Professor Bronner is talking about today, which is the ambitious Pandit project, a digital humanities project aiming at creating a database for the vast world of South Indian letters. I'm really happy to have this project presented by you here because it's so immensely important for all other digital humanities projects that are in our field as in many respects. So thank you very much, Professor Bronner, for giving us the time and for presenting this project today. I'm really, and we all are very much looking forward to your presentation.
Thank you so much, and thank you everyone thanks for inviting me, and thank you everyone who came to this talk. What I'll do today, I'll turn on my presentation in a second, but what I'll do today is I'll give a little bit of the history of the short history of Pandit, the last decade and a little bit over a decade of work on this project, and how sometimes I present it as the sorry tale of how I became a digital humanist, something I had no intention of becoming when I came into this. And then I'll present to you the project and where we are and where we're going, and open it up for conversation and discussion, because I'm sure there will be a lot of questions and comments that will make that will be the really interesting part. So Pandit, by the way, is an acronym. It's not just a reference to the fully versatile scholar who knows all the text and all the lipis and all the languages, but also an acronym for prosopographical database for Indic text. And I know that there is nothing for the N there yet, but if you have some ideas, let me know. So how did this come about? Ute, you mentioned that I've been working for many years on the work of Appaya Dikshita, 16th century polymath from South India, and some 10, 12 years ago, I thought I'll do a project on Appaya Dikshita, and with this project, I'll create a niche database on Appaya Dikshita. Appaya Dikshita is famous for having written 100 works, or maybe 104 or 108, 100 Indian 100 works. So, but we don't exactly know the full list of 100 works, and I thought, let me do a small database on these 100 works that he composed, which are the works, which what are the topics, what are the different kinds of works. And then I started to create this database with the help of a software person. And once we finished creating this database, just the empty vessels were ready for pouring in the data. And what we realized was that what we created was, in a way, too powerful to be wasted quote unquote, on just a niche database. And also, it will be very difficult also to keep it to a niche database. Let's say Appaya Dikshita composes a work on Mimamsa or on Alankara Shastra in the 16th century. And in this work, he has the entire library in each of these disciplines lying in front of him, and he quotes from these works, or he reuses textual bits from these works. So we would have to create entries for these works and for their authors and for their manuscripts. And so we realized we kind of created a monster. And at that moment, I think we had two options. One was to say, okay, so what? Let's just do what we plan to do. And the other was to go with the adventure. Maybe we should have chosen the first option, but we didn't. And then we said, okay, let's not even start and populate the database with data. Let's, with data about Appaya Dikshita, let's populate it with more ambitious information, metadata. So the first thing we did, we went to a project called SKSEC, Sanskrit Knowledge Systems on the Eve of Colonialism. We went there because I was involved in this project earlier. This was a project led by Professor Sheldon Pollock. And a part of the project was creating what you can see here, maybe with my arrow, a bio-bibliographical database on the state of Sanskrit knowledge system at this kind of early modern period, 16th, 17th, 18th century. So kind of the same period as Appaya and his successors. And if you go to this website, here you just see a screenshot, but if you go to this website and you click on the biographical database, you will get nowhere. This was defunct already at the time. And we came to Pollock and the team and we said, give us all the data that people have already entered and we'll pour it into our database. So that was our first import, not a huge import, but we learned a little bit from this process. Then we said, let's do a bigger import. And we went to Karl Potter's Indian Philosophies, the bibliography, okay, which is online. But it's online, and it's still online, but it's kind of online. It's like it looks comparative to what the internet can do today and what digital humanities can do today. It looks like a very primitive stage. It's not easily searchable. It's not related. It's in all kind of indices and bibliographies. And we received Potter's permission and we imported the whole thing again into our relational database. So it's true, by the way, that most of the data here were, it was a bibliography, and that too was not sufficiently updated at that point. There was articles, books, things like that, but there was also a mine of data that was really gold standard data about the works themselves, the authors, the dates, and so on. And that is what we really wanted. And so we kind of imported this huge bibliography as a side effect to the data that we really wanted to mine. And that was a lot of hard work because you have to create scripts to import these kind of bibliographical lists and connect the lists, connect the bibliographical items correctly to the works and connect the works to the authors and so on. So we did that. And then we had a sizable database running and kicking. And then we thought, okay, now we need to there were all kinds of mistakes we did in the choice of our imports already. Let's create kind of not huge imports, but let's create islands in this huge ocean metadata about Indian intellectual history. Let's create islands of very rich, very good data that we can get from sources that are available but are not digitized. And we created this collaboration with the Bhandarkar Oriental Research Institute, BORI, and we got their permission to digitize their entire descriptive catalog of Vedanta, okay? So these are 3 volumes, 3 volumes of the, and those of you who know what a descriptive catalog is, and those of you who know the quality of the Bhandarkar Oriental Research Institute descriptive catalogs, they can appreciate the kind of data that is there, the metadata. So this is a list of many, many hundreds, thousands of manuscripts that they hold on Vedanta. And for each manuscript, you get a description of the manuscript, you get excerpts from the manuscripts, the Mangala Shloka, the beginning, the end, you get the author, you get sometimes a table of contents. All this data we imported together with this wonderful team that gathered. This was also in collaboration with the Rise of Vedanta project, the University of Toronto, Professor Ajay Rao, and people on the ground in Bori. And we completed this project. We have all this data now. And again, it's not just that we copied this data to our, we poured all wine to new bottles, but everything is related. So if you take a certain work on Vedanta, all its manuscripts are listed under it. Each manuscript is related to the work. Each excerpt is related to its manuscript. All the authors are related to their parents and their teachers, if we know the information, and so on. So a lot of work, and some important research discoveries were made by people like Jonathan Peterson, who worked on this, who is now at the University of Columbia in New York. And so this was actually really, these imports are also basic science, are also basic research, and that's something we learned along the way. And I'll give you a few examples of the other projects that we did. But before that, let me just say, by way of prefacing this, let me just say, when there was a lot of naivete on my part going into this project, and a lot of sobering that was involved in it. Initially, what I imagined was a kind of an Indological Wikipedia, right? So all my colleagues and my teachers and my students, they all know a great deal about texts, about people, about manuscripts, about these things. And they all have on their fingertips and in their notebooks and in their heads and in their books and in their publications, a lot of information. What if each of us would, devote some time to working online on the things that are his or her specialty, that we know about, and then this will create an immense database and a lot of knowledge. Okay, that was a nice idea, but it doesn't work that way. We realized one of the reasons that it doesn't work that way is that the academic system doesn't credit us for this kind of work. We don't get tenure. We can't put. We can, but people don't look at it. If we put it on our CV, I composed, or edited 400 entries on Pandit.org. I don't know how much credit people will get for this come their tenure or promotion or grant application and so on. So we realized we need to change our model. And the model was, let's do projects. We'll team up with people in different universities. They have their funding. They keep their funding. Okay, we're not asking for for their money. We ask for a little bit support for the tech person that runs this big operation, but otherwise the money should stay at their home institutions. They should pay their graduate students for this kind of work, for data entry and the basic research that goes with that. And the data will be stored on Pandit. They can also export it in all kinds of formats. So we did this project with the Toronto team and Bandar Oriental Research Institute. We're doing a project that's called Early Science Project with Dominic Wujastik, University of Alberta in Canada. There is a project with Elisa Freschi on Venkatanata, also known as Vedanta Deshika. She and Manasi Chow, who are both working on this project, have since moved universities, but the project is still going on. And just to give you some statistics from the site that I made a screenshot yesterday. So we have about 67 plus entities, what we call entities on Pandit. The biggest still is prints, that is to say bibliographical items, that is the baggage that we got from Karl Potter's bibliography. But we have information about close to 13,000 works, 7,500 manuscripts, almost 6,000 extracts from manuscripts, over 5,000 people, and so on. And now we advance in this kind of form of collaboration with special projects. Okay. Before I tell you about our current collaborations, just to show you how our mindset and the kind of architecture of the site has changed. So when I thought initially about a niche database for the 100 works of Dikshita, we had a kind of a simple kind of relational structure. There were works, the 100 works of Dikshita. Some of them were there were people, and there were sites that are either mentioned in these works, or the sites in which these works were composed, or the sites in which these people lived. And you know, people relate to people in all kinds of relations. They are the children or parents of other people, or the teachers or students of other people, or the patrons or the receivers of patronship, or the authors. And then there are relationships between work and people, relationships between works and works. Works can be commentaries on works, work can mention works, and so on. So we thought this was a kind of a complicated structure, but when we started to expand our horizons, we realized that we didn't think about all kinds of entities, and we overlooked all kinds of relationships. And as you can see, there's endless scope for complication, and the structure now is far more detailed, far more flexible, and far more complicated than we initially conceived of. Okay, and some entity types like manuscripts have dozens of fields. The physical shape of the manuscript, the completeness of the manuscript, the number of works contained in the manuscript, the history of a certain manuscript, where it was owned, where it is now located, and so on and so forth. Okay, so we did our best to be able to allow the data to enter everything that seemed important without making it prohibitive, with kind of in a way that will make the data entrer give up and say, okay, too much. They're asking me for too much information. And of course, most of the fields are not compulsory. You can leave it for later and add more data when you have it or when you have more time. Okay, so this was a little bit about the initial history of the database. I thought it was important to give it because it would show you how our thinking evolved and how we fell into this mess of running an ambitious digital digital humanities project. Now, it's important to mention that in the last few years, we have teamed up with a kind of a strategic partner, I would call it, Samhita. Samhita is a project of the India International Center, their International Research Division, that's headed by Dr. Sudha Gopalkrishnan. And their idea was to create a database, a digital database on South Asian manuscripts that are outside of India. Okay, manuscripts that are not necessarily in the modern state of India that was founded in 1947 at the moment. Okay, maybe they're not there because they were just not created there. Maybe they were created in Nepal and that's their place, or maybe they're not in India because they were sold or taken away by colonial powers. Doesn't matter. The point is to create and this is an extremely ambitious project because there are tens of thousands of manuscripts like that. It's a gigantic library. And we teamed up, and they received some funding from the Indian government, and we did several pilot projects together. I'll give you an example of some of these pilot projects. Basically, teams of Samhita went to manuscript collections in different places, either in Asia or in Europe, and they took all the metadata and sometimes also digital images of certain smaller collections in these places, and all this information was also found place on Pandit. And I'll give you a few examples. So we went, for example, the team from Samhita went to Hebew University in Kathmandu, and they created a database there of, let's say, 300 manuscripts or so from there, with all the works that are contained in them, all the extracts they could record from them, the authors, the related prints, and so on. Then they started to work with Wellcome Collection in London. You know, Wellcome Collection is a huge library of something like 12,000 manuscripts in all Indian languages and disciplines, and only a small portion of these are even cataloged. That's another big thing. When you go to these collections like Oxford or Wellcome Institute or places like that, they sit on a lot of manuscripts that nobody has never looked at, that nobody is even cataloged. We don't even know what they have. So what our team did there was worked on 100 manuscripts that were originally cataloged by David Pingree. And again, this information, it was led by the extremely able Arpan Guha, and we have this pilot has already been successfully done. There is a team that works with the Copenhagen University collection under the guidance of Professor Zisk. They have at least 3,000 manuscripts, mostly in Sanskrit, mostly 18th century from Bihar and UP. And again, this team has been able to create metadata on more than 500 manuscripts, and they also digitized a lot of manuscripts. So just in our collaboration with Samhita in the last couple of years, we've created entries for more than 1,000 or more than 1,100 manuscripts, close to 1,000 works. So a lot of data entry that is very well curated and very important data. And all this is a kind of a pilot that now went to the Indian government, and apparently I'm told we're going to, or Samhita is going to be funded for a more long-term project that is not just a pilot project. And so this is a way of growing for this database, and that's why I see it as a kind of a strategic collaboration. I'll say a few more words about this when I talk about the future in a second, because the future is really what is important. We tend to talk about the past because we think we know a little bit more about it, but it's the future that matters. Before I end this kind of presentation, let me just show you how. So, as a gesture to the future, you're the last people I think that I'm presenting the old Pandit to, because what we are working on for a very long time is a new Pandit. New in two senses. One is that it will be based, so Pandit is based on Drupal, which is the world's leading content management software. But when we started on a version of Drupal that is aged since, like these things tend to age. So this was Drupal 7. Now there's also Drupal 9 and 10. We're upgrading our system to the latest version of Drupal. And at the same time, we're also updating the design of Pandit. For now, this design includes primarily the website, but we also hope to create a new design for mobile interface, and also for the forms. That's almost done also. So they kind of it's not just what you see when you go into pandit.org as a visitor, but also when you register and you start entering or editing data, we're making this more user friendly. So just take a look. This is this is the new design. This is how a project page will look. This is how an entity page will look. And this is how our search page is going to look, and you can click the different things you want to search for, and so on. So this, I hope this summer, in August, we will be able to launch this and ask all our friends and all of our contributors to test it and help us debug it, and then we will have a new system running. So now to speak about the future and the kind of worries and responsibilities that come with this kind of database. So again, as I think it was clear from the beginning of my presentation, I do not come from a long or deep background in digital humanities. I didn't imagine myself spending many hours doing this when I entered this, but this kind of happened. And once it happened, I think there are responsibilities and worries that come with it. How to ensure that so for example, the funding for this costs money to keep the data on a server costs a little bit money every month, but to make sure that the data is stored properly, that the design changes according to the needs of every project we team up with, and so on, to upgrade from one version of Drupal to another, and to upgrade the design, of course. All this costs a lot of money and and usually with these things, everything costs more and takes more time than you initially estimated. And the question is how to ensure that all this work and all this effort is not going to become defunct like earlier database projects. So I think this is something I'm constantly thinking about. So far, most of the funding came either in the form of projects, research projects that I applied for and had a digital humanities component, or projects that colleagues in the world applied for, and in collaboration with Pandit. So actually, it's something to keep in mind. If you're applying for some kind of a research grant, granting agencies very much want these days for there to be a digital humanities component. And instead of each and every project inventing the wheel and creating their own script and their own code and their own database, if the project gets a letter from Pandit that we will team up with them and we will provide our platform for them free of service, that helps them to get good points from the evaluators of the granting agency. And it helps us to get the data. So I think it's a win-win situation for everyone, but you cannot always trust on projects like this to go on. So I think eventually, for the benefit of Pandit and for the benefit of, I mean, we're just I'm talking about history, but this is just the very infancy of a project that we cannot see the end of which, and I very much hope will not only outlast me, but will live on. And so I think eventually some kind of an institutional home has to be found for Pandit. Pandit, by the way, that doesn't belong to any institute and doesn't belong to me. It's not even it's not a project of my university. It doesn't even sit on the servers of my university. Don't ask me where the servers are physically located. Nobody knows these things, but it's a project that belongs to the Indological community, or to the community that works on India more generally, or South Asia more generally, not necessarily Indology even in the kind of narrower German sense of the word, but broadly defined, every language, every period. And I think it's important that we find some kind of, so for the time being, we're looking for more collaborations, and there are big prizes out there that wait for us. There was the Namami project, the mission to digitize all the manuscripts in India. Again, it's not exactly available online, and if we can collaborate with them, it's not so simple. That would be wonderful. There is the German Nepal manuscript project that is not accessible to the public, unfortunately. That's all there lying in I don't know where, and if you have a good friend in the project, you can sometimes get information about a certain manuscript. But again, so big, there's a longer now history of these projects, the projects that were funded up to a point, and then all the great information that they collected is now sitting somewhere. I think the future is in collaboration and in working with people and getting permissions and making sure everybody is on board. So there were all kinds of initiatives that we didn't take so far because there wasn't full collaboration. I want to work only in kind of full agreement with everyone. For example, we wanted, there was some talk, many meetings about digitizing all the Pingree volumes, okay? But there was another team that wanted to do it, so I didn't want to compete. Pandit didn't want to compete with another team. That didn't happen. Maybe it will still happen. But again, the idea is to work with everybody, give everybody credit, everybody that puts data into Pandit, enters data into Pandit. There's credit to that person. You can see what the person has did. You can even compare versions, what changed after X entered the data and what changed after Y added more data, and so on and so forth. So there are all kinds of ways of also correcting or changing things and going back. So the database, the principles of the Pandit database is that everything is free, everything is totally transparent, everything is downloadable. You can take all the data, export it, put it on your computer, play with it, see what happens to it, and the next stage really is to create more complicated, more sophisticated tools that can show you, that can create charts and maps and diagrams and see how text move from place to place, or how manuscripts move to place, or how people moved, or, you know, things like that. So, or paramparas, lineages of disciples and students and teachers and so on. So a lot can be done in the future, but it really has to be a community effort. It cannot be just a cross of one person to bear.